Okay, so hello everyone. So thank you for joining us this early in the morning in California. I'll start by introducing myself, and then I'm gonna introduce Hassan here. So I'm doing this for the first time. I'm a new volunteer with OpenSV, and you can find more details about OpenSV through their LinkedIn and Facebook page. But my name is Mariam Kiran. I am a research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I lead a research group in AI and computer networks. So we do a lot of deep learning on computer networking data sets. So very excited about tech industries as well, because we're trying to always turn our tools into something which can be marketable. So it's really exciting to have Hassan here, who's actually been through that process and been very successful. So Hassan has a very interesting background. He has a BSc in physics and economics from University of British Columbia. But then he became a tech entrepreneur and co-founded CryptoNumerics, which was a data privacy and machine learning startup, which was very quickly acquired by Snowflake. And I'm going to pass this back to Hassan to introduce more about himself before I start firing some questions at him.
Thank you so much, Mariam, and thanks for the OpenSV for having me today. Super excited to be spending this next hour with you guys. As Mariam was mentioning, my background is I grew up in Pakistan, Rawalpindi, Pakistan, moved to Canada around 11 years ago to pursue my undergrad. And different things led me to the tech sector, which I feel very fortunate about. Spent my first 2 years out of college in the Valley, learning from some of the biggest entrepreneurs and learning what the building blocks of building a company looks like. I came back to Canada after that, and through some fortunate circumstances, met a team which ended up building CryptoNumerics. And we kind of picked this problem because we saw that as machine learning is growing, there's a lot of challenges around using sensitive data, and we thought like there could be a big opportunity in that. And due to various reasons, we ended up selling it to Snowflake, and today I'm at Snowflake, a part of the product BD and go-to-market team focused on data monetization, data marketplace, and those type of initiatives. And beside that, I'm also very actively investing in early stage companies around data cloud, data infrastructure space, and part of a fund called Community Fund, as well as actively involved with some early stage organizations, both in North America and Pakistan.
Okay, thank you. So Hassan, how did you actually start with CryptoNumerics? How did the idea first come to you, and why did you think it was a worthwhile venture to go into?
Yeah, so actually, like the idea was developed by a lady named Monica Holberg. She was the CEO and the co-founder of this company. She had this idea. She did her PhD in Caltech and in the optimization space, and she saw the opportunity from a mathematical perspective, like how you can kind of use sensitive data and apply some mathematical models to kind of reduce the privacy exposure, but still get the model used. I got introduced to her through one of my mentors. He's actually was the ex-CTO of Yahoo, Ash Munshi, Muslim gentleman as well, very successful in the Valley. He introduced me to her, and when I met her and learned about the idea, what she wanted to do, I was like, hey, this is going to be a big opportunity, and what they're trying to do, if it scales, could really reshape how we use sensitive data in the healthcare space, in the financial services space, and I just jumped on. And they were nice enough to have me as a co-founder.
Nice. So talking in terms of the privacy and the AI issues, what is CryptoNumerics actually pushing boundaries of? How does AI intersect here?
Yeah, so when CryptoNumerics is part of Snowflake, so we kind of have been absorbed by them. In essence, like the thesis behind CryptoNumerics was that there are different privacy and cryptography techniques, such as k-anonymization, secure multi-party compute. A lot of those techniques, what they status quo in the market of using sensitive data was like, hey, let's tokenize it and let's mask it. But the challenge is that if you mask or tokenize the data, you lose the utility for it in the model. And if the utility in the model is lost, then it's not really useful for that data to be used in real production machine learning models. So we wanted to change that. A big challenge for k-anonymization, secure multi-party compute was it was just not proven in the market. it was not been scaled before. And we kind of figure out a way of like, how do you take this lab kind of project and scale this in a commercial application? How does like a big Fortune 500 company use it? How does like a big pharma company use that? So like that was kind of like the key innovation we came up with, and we kind of productized it and put it in hands of data scientists and users to kind of like play with it and improve their models and the outcomes of the models by having sensitive data be part of that process.
Nice. Okay. So the question which is coming to my mind. So how did Snowflake happen? How did they see the value in this and then acquired it, and how are they using it now?
Yeah. So one of our customers had just migrated the data warehouse capabilities over to Snowflake, and via them met some of their team members, and we started kind of like working with Snowflake as well to kind of explore, like how do we deliver this value. But it became clear that Snowflake was thinking about the data monetization feature, like a data sharing feature, like how does the world share data within enterprises, and one of the key pieces of that was privacy enabling technology, which would be key in making sure enterprises are able to share the data in a seamless, secure manner. And as like all big companies are, right, it's a build or buy decision. And at that point, like their team decided like, what we were offering from an IP perspective, our expertise made sense. And they decided to acquire us just, I think this is in the summer of 2020 before their IPO. It's part of a cash and stock deal.
Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing is it actually started as a relationship before they actually started acquiring you. So
yes, I spoke with I got to know some of their team members way before that. Also, some of their investors as well. So it was a few months before we actually officially started the acquisition conversation. But that was because of that relationship and the utility of our product. Their team saw like they were able to we were able to have that acquisition conversation.
Nice. So it's okay when you're having a relationship, but then when the acquiring starts, it becomes all technical and very legal. So what are the biggest challenges you saw when you started getting acquired, or something which people should be aware of?
Yeah, so I think luckily for us, the process was very smooth, and it was amazing working with the Snowflake kind of team as a whole process from that perspective. Generally, I think like the key thing is that if you are kind of thinking of getting acquired, like the key playbook in that mindset, like which we ran, was kind of identified all the key companies which you wanted to hit, build that pipeline like a sales process, ran that, build those relationships, got in front of the right stakeholders, and then identify where the opportunity is. And then you want to have a very high quality data room. So whenever like an acquirer kind of goes in, they find all the relevant information, like there's no misrepresentation of anything of that sort. It's a trust-based process to some extent. If you can have your data room of the highest quality and integrity, I think it mitigates any potential legal or red flags or anything which may crop up. And I think that's what we did. We had a very one of our co-founders was very particular about setting that up, and made it a very seamless process for Snowflake to do their due diligence, and that allowed us to get this process done pretty fast.
Okay, and the customers which you're looking at are big pharma, or any other kind of technologies you're also targeting for in terms of keeping their data secure?
So now at Snowflake, this product has just gone. Snowflake has launched a private preview of data privacy stuff, which we had built for all of our customers. So any Snowflake customer can use that if they want to have sensitive data. They want to have that stored in Snowflake. They can anonymize it. So now it's broad based, very super broad based.
Okay, interesting. So it's basically so currently the market for a data platform as a service, right? Do you think that there are still certain holes or something which people can work on, challenges or opportunities which people can develop in this field?
I think there's definitely a lot of companies who are playing the role, building companies within the data privacy space, decentralized machine learning space. I also think that organizations like Snowflake, they're going to reshape how we think about cloud-based applications. You can now have a very simple data warehouse set up on Snowflake. You can build an application on top of that, something which is not just reading, but also writing to the data warehouse. And that I think is going to spur in the next like 1 to 3 years, like very interesting enterprise applications, like managed data warehouse services, managed data sharing applications, data visualization applications. There are so much opportunity now with how what you can do and build on top of these cloud ecosystems and how simple they have made it. And data privacy is like one piece which enables you now to use much more sensitive data into these applications as well. And I think that's the key piece. It's kind of like think about data privacy as like an infrastructure building block, and which will enable other use cases to happen.
Yeah. So, from our example, from my own research example, we've been looking at this case where you have multiple devices collecting data, and then you're trying to learn machine learning models off of it. So it's kind of like a federated machine learning model. So do you think this kind of covers that as well?
Yeah, that was kind of like our second product, of like how do you federate machine learning? And I think there are different approaches to doing that. Like secure multi-party compute was like one approach we had kind of like looked at, and within Snowflake as well, right? Like we are kind of there are capabilities which allow those things to happen, and I think that's a massive space, right? Like as individuals become much more sensitive about how their data is used and they want more ownership of their data, but they still want their data to be monetized if they're okay with it. So a lot of companies which are trying to do that, and decentralized machine learning, I think, is a building block for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's something which is a big challenge in machine learning right now, which we're also looking at. So where do you see the future of cloud data warehouse and data monetization market per se?
Yeah, so I think like, I think, there's massive opportunity to build cloud-based applications, which can read and write to these data warehouse product. That's what I'm excited about. Like now you have organizations like Snowflake, which are building data marketplace. So you have third-party data, which is super accessible to you. You have your own first-party data sitting in a data warehouse as well. How can you connect these third and first party data to build a new unique insight and application for different industries? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of like data standardization which needs to happen for different industries as well. These cloud applications, I think, will make it super easy to do that as well. So those are some things like on the data infrastructure side, which I'm excited about. And then when I think about data monetization, I think the market is super big. If you want to monetize your data, how much should you price it at? How should you even price it at? How do you protect the privacy? How do you go about doing all of these things? There's no one framework to do that, and I think I'm super excited about like building the data marketplace at Snowflake, because I think we are contributing that in the market, and there's a huge opportunity to do that.
Okay, interesting. So obviously we know COVID happened, right? And we know computer networks were essentially brought right up to the front because everybody was Zooming in for school and offices. How did the COVID era affect you guys? So in your work or mentally, or how did you cope with it?
Yeah, so we started the deal process, I guess, with Snowflake just before COVID really went crazy. And we had actually planned to be in SF to meet their key stakeholders who were looking at our company. And obviously that had to be shelved as a plan for us because COVID really went crazy in April, and a lot of travel was shut down. So now we had to run the whole process in a virtual setting. And definitely we've never done that before. A lot of these transactions mean you have to meet the people in person, get to know them as well, and they feel comfortable. Just iterating to ensure that through a virtual system, you can still build that trust, you can still build that credibility, was I think a key thing which we had to really pivot towards very fast if you wanted to make sure this transaction or generally our process goes well. It was a great learning experience. And I think what really helped us in that is, being straightforward, having a solid documentation, data room, that everything was transparent, like allowed people to build that trust, even though you're not meeting in person. And I think it's been work from home, so it's definitely a very different experience of like, I onboarded Snowflake in a virtual world. That's my first kind of onboarding to a company virtually. So very different, like, learning how do you develop those relationships and those connections as well was a new lesson. So those are some challenges, but I think now after a year, it seems in hindsight, a nice skill to build for the future we live in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to ask you more questions about the acquisition journey you had, right? So, for example, in our world, in computer networking, we are sometimes advised to develop services which you can think of the big markets like Cisco would buy off. So that's kind of like the mindset which is told to us when we're designing our services. Did you start with that mindset, or how did you, what was your mindset when you started with CryptoNumerics? That you're going to be active? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think like that's a great question. I think like whenever like a founder, and that's maybe like a general statement on this to answer this question. As a founder, I think whenever you start, you never kind of like envision that you will get acquired at an X point. Your goal is that, hey, I want to solve this X problem. This is why I want to solve this problem, and this is how I'm going to go about doing it. And you have, steps, and you kind of stage the solving of that problem via an MVP, then an alpha and a beta product, and like few features ship, getting it in the hand of customers. And we kind of follow the similar journey as well, right? Like working with customers, solving their problems, and then growing from there. I think it was more of a situational thing where this opportunity came along, and we thought like, hey, this made a lot of sense, and we should kind of explore this. And for the future benefit of like, the product and like the impact, it could be very meaningful, right? Like Snowflake is using our team capacity to, add features within the privacy space, which is awesome. A lot of acquisitions you acquire, and then, the product is never is never added to the platform. In this case, like, that we thought like would not happen, and that's the case, and which is very awesome, right? Like now thousands of customers are going to benefit from what we thought about like a few years ago. And that's incredible. And, as a founder, that's one thing you all obviously want to happen, is like, a lot of people use what you envisioned to be, to build. So, yeah.
So I can imagine it was very exciting when you saw your baby actually getting scaled up. So was there a particular, so from a mentally point of view, did you have to conquer certain thoughts that, okay, I'm going to let it go and grow by someone else, or what were your thoughts?
I think we're still part of the team and process. So I think that the exciting thing is we still get to work on the similar things, just as part of like now a bigger, bolder global organization, which I think makes it even more exciting. From that perspective, and I think like if your goal is like, the impact and like solving a problem, the right partner at the right time can really make that happen. Because even if you think of raising money, VCs are partners on your journey. They're providing capital and support to you to grow. I think like an acquisition is also a similar kind of aspect of that, where obviously you're giving up significant, like all of the control in the process, but as long the directionally it's in the right direction, then it's very exciting.
So okay, yeah, that's very I can imagine very exciting. So where do you get, so I guess with working with Snowflake, you're also looking at more problems and trying to solve those as well. So where do you get your inspiration from, or what is your mantra which you kind of follow for that?
Yeah, so in essence, I think like I love like the data monetization, data privacy, and data sharing space. I think that's going to be a massive opportunity in this decade. So as part of like Snowflake, I think there are a lot of interesting folks who are also excited about the same problem. Just chatting with them, being aware of like what's going on across the board, I think is one way. I think the second way I found to be get inspiration and just like stay abreast of what's going on is like by meeting other founders who are thinking of similar problems and spaces. or adjacent or like the same space to kind of stay abreast of like, what's the newest innovation, what are problems people are trying to solve. So that kind of combination, I think, really helps you stay aware of what's going on, and then accordingly kind of decide on what you are excited about spending time on, like what you should be working on and building.
Okay. So what advice would you give to the newbies entering the competitive market of data monetization right now? So what is the thing which you will tell them to start thinking about?
Yeah, I think the monetization as a service space and data as a service, I think, are very still nascent spaces. There are a lot of like traditional companies in this space who have dominated the market for decades. And I think now with platforms like platforms in the cloud, if you build and all of these things, if you're kind of like, I'll say like the framework would be, if you want to build it in this space, right? Like the key thing is, how are you kind of like collecting that data? Is that data being collected in a private, secure manner? You kind of like, the new regulations should come in on like protecting consumer laws. Are you doing all of those things or not? And accordingly, then deciding on like what products and applications you want to build on top of them. I think that's one kind of framework to kind of think about. I think another kind of like thing is that you also want to not just like think about data monetization itself as like, hey, I'm going to like build something to monetize data, but instead of like, hey, if you're building a product with a data mode and you're doing anything in any space with the data mode, how can you kind of like add value with that data to the same customer of yours, right? Like imagine if you're building a product which 30 people are using, but now can you help each of the user by aggregating the data across all 30 of them and just providing them digitally, not monetizing the data or selling it to anyone else. It's building a co-op kind of ecosystem as well. I think that's like a very interesting area to explore. And I think a lot of companies will start doing that. But generally, I think like it's a pretty nascent space, and there are a lot of opportunities in it to explore.
I think I also read that you can in CryptoNumerics, you can also see how the data is being used as well. Am I right? Because when I was reading up on CryptoNumerics.
To some extent, right? Like it really depends how you're kind of deploying product. We never like did like massive enterprise deployments, so it was mostly in pilots. So I think it kind of varies, but like theoretically, you can kind of do those type of things.
Okay, so yeah, so that would be really interesting to see how, if I'm monetizing my data set, how are people using it? So what are the key lessons on? So let's come down to building a technical company, right, and building a product where you're launching it, where there are already big players in the scene. What are the key lessons which you learned in that space? So from a not data monetization, but just a technical thing which you had to conquer.
Can you repeat that question, Mary?
So let's go off from the data monetization area, and now you're building a technical company and you're introducing it into a market where you already have very big players which exist there.
Yeah.
So what are the key lessons you learned in that particular perspective?
Yeah, I know. I think that's a great question. So I think like whenever you're trying to commercialize like a technical product or anything of that sort, your tendency is that you just want to build and build before you even go talk to customers. So I think the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out distribution, and you want to kind of do that by talking to as many customers as possible in day zero to understand what is like that one or two specific kind of problem areas which they want solved, and how can you kind of even kind of segment it further and further into like a very narrow problem area which you can build for. Until you don't have that figured out, I think building something is not really that useful, because you can build it, but like if you don't really know exactly the specific problem the product is going to solve, then you don't know the personas of the customers, you don't know like how you will go like pitch it. So if you're building a technical product, I'll go talk to the customers first, just narrow down the specific problem. Or if you already know all of that information, then I'll go build something very minimal and give it to them and see like how they use it, what feedback they get from it before you kind of, go to the next step. And that's kind of like the key thing, because if you kind of give the user the product and you get amazing feedback and they're like delighted by it, then you add more features, so the velocity of your shipping features is really high, then you are on the right track. Because if the users are delighted, they're like liking all the features you're shipping, you're solving a specific problem, VC dollars will come, revenue will come, and your company will keep growing. But if you do the other way around, you build the product, the full thing, and then you try to go give it to customers, it may or may not work. So you want to, that's kind of like the playbook I would use if someone was trying to build something in the technical space.
So let me ask another question on this. So are there key performance indicators which you're trying to measure to see how good your product is when you're testing it out?
I feel like in the early days, like, in the early stage, or like, like your seed stage or like pre-seed stage, you don't want, like, the key thing is you want to understand how your users are interacting and using your product. If like the expectation is that the user typically spends, I don't know, 30 minutes in the day on a product like similar in your space, and they hate it, and their NPS goes up because after using your product for 30 minutes, like they're just delighted and more excited, that's a great metric to measure. So every product is different, right? So like it's hard to like give like one standard metric, but the key thing is just understanding how the users are expected to interact with your product, how they should be interacting, and like, are those expectations being met? And I think that depends on the space, industry, vertical, the type of product, and there are very different metrics for each one of them.
Yeah, because having these metrics is easy for then going and pitching it to other people, right? You can have comparison graphs that.
Yeah, you can like build like you can build like a list of metrics that doesn't really make any difference unless like the users actually use your product and they're excited about it. And then you can, tell a story, because data is like just one piece, but if it's not the right data, you're measuring the wrong things, then that's not really useful. I think in the earliest days, instead of building KPIs or like, metrics around that, I would just we just want to spend time of making sure that customers are genuinely actually excited about your product and willing to actually pay for that as well, right? Like the best way to like know if your product actually solves a problem in the early days is by asking customers to pay for a pilot and buy the product. And no one is willing to pay for a pilot or like buy your product, then whatever metrics you're measuring doesn't really make any difference, because they're not spending dollars. And they're not spending dollars. I think that's the best metric, which tells you like you are not solving a real problem.
Okay, nice. Very exciting. So where do you see yourself or CryptoNumerics or the journey in 5 years? What is next for you?
So we're just at Snowflake. So, I'm excited to like be part of the Snowflake ecosystem and keep contributing, building as much as we can. I think we are just in day zero of building our data ecosystem there. And it's a massive, massive opportunity. So super excited to be doing that.
Okay, interesting. So, so we also have open questions for the audiences. So if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A session, because then we can ask Hassan, while we have him here, all of those questions as well. So we have a few questions already in the Q&A, so I'm going to jump through those. So how long, so it's more, so this is again from your acquisition side. How long did the journey take from the first product development up to the acquisition actually happening?
Yeah, so I think it was like around 2.5 years for us to like get to like the next to the acquisition stage approximately. And the first year was first year, 2 years were just like us building, talking to customers, contributing to it and that ecosystem. And then the next kind of 6 months was when we ran the acquisition process. It was like if you're not gotten acquired, you would have raised a Series A at that point in essence. So it was a fast process for us from inception to acquisition.
Yeah, but I guess it took some time to develop that relationship with them as well, right?
Yes. As part of that, within those 2 years, obviously, we were exploring that opportunity and talking to folks at Snowflake and trying to collaborate with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So I guess, so this other question is very close to my heart because I've witnessed this, the GDPR being introduced in EU. How do you think laws like the GDPR and it's also the CCPA in California are going to be affected by what you are doing? Is there any relationship there?
Yeah, so I just want to like difference, right? So like we're not actively operating as CryptoNumerics at all. So like that's not really anything we are affected by or anything like that. So just want to be clear about that. So it's fully part of Snowflake, and we are just like a team within Snowflake as Snowflake team members. Just want to be clear about that. Don't operate at all as a separate entity or anything like that. So I think like these laws like impact data sharing as a whole, and they don't really impact anything I work on at this point specifically. But generally, I think if you are so I spend time on data marketplaces where like a lot of our customers are bringing their data they want to monetize. So a lot of these customers need to be thinking about what are the key features they need to use to ensure that they're in compliance with these laws. And one aspect is that the data privacy things which Snowflake offers, they can use that. There are also other ways they can go about doing it. So it's if you're selling data, you're monetizing data, then you want to be aware of these laws, and they will impact how you do that, because now with GDPR, CCPA, as an individual, you have rights to your data, and you can kind of prevent people from selling it. So I think your third-party data selling market has drastically changed from what it was before. Like, it was a massive market, and now it's, I think like a lot of players have changed their strategies, because now you need consent before you can do a lot of things, which I think is awesome, making it more compliant with like how people want their data to be used and shared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So I remember I was in a few discussions about smart cities, and they were talking about selling temperature data or traffic data, which was also going to bring incentive to the people to actually collect the data as well, because now you're getting money for it, right? So have you seen similar examples?
For money, like from a privacy perspective, I mean,
For people who are actually collecting data sets.
That I to be honest, I don't have a lot of insight on that piece because I've not looked into that, so won't be able to address that.
Okay, interesting. So there is another question here. So you're based in Canada. So what is pivotal? Is the location pivotal in raising the funds and scaling your product, or do you have to be in Silicon Valley for doing this? So what is your experience on that?
I think different people have different opinions on this. So I think it's a very opinionated thing, and I think everyone's mileage may vary depending on how you look at it and what your experience has been. Personally, for me, I think the Valley obviously has created that ecosystem where you can connect with like amazing investors, founders, operators, and it's like a melting pot of that. But I think since COVID, you've seen a lot of folks be digital, virtual. And I think that reach has now made it possible for people to be anywhere and be able to raise money. And we've seen that, right? Like the Pakistan ecosystem has blown up significantly. I think LATAM is blowing up as well. So VCs are looking far and wide as well. And I think founders are also picking cities where they want to live, not primarily because of like being close to investors or being in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. I think it's a digital ecosystem. So I believe like, your location is not doesn't matter that much anymore. It matters obviously, like, you should be where your customers are, to be honest. So if your customers are like in a certain place and they operate in a certain way, you should be close to them. So if your customers are in the Valley, then you should be in the Valley. If your customers are in New York, you should be in New York. If they're in Asia, you should be in Asia. So I think like that is for me like the key thing. And I think it's not really any more important to be in one specific city physically to get stuff done.
So what about funding opportunities? Do you think a location matters for getting funding opportunities?
I think obviously like there's a natural tendency of people to like invest where they feel comfortable, and I think that obviously will take some time to change. It's significantly changed already in the last 2 years, but obviously it's much easier to raise money in let's say San Francisco than maybe New York comparably, or Toronto maybe slightly. But again, I think everyone's mileage matters, right? Like there are people who have done amazing stuff globally raising money, and I think it doesn't really matter to where you are. So at the end of the day, I think if you're building something really amazing and a really amazing product in a company, I think investors will want to support you no matter where you are. Your goal is to make sure that you get in front of them. And if that requires, like you can do that virtually very easily.
Okay. So do you mind sharing what your experience was raising money or getting funding for your work when you started?
Yeah. So I think for us, like the location made a huge difference in being able to raise the money and being able to get the funding. Because I think at that point you went through a lab accelerator program called Creative Destruction Lab, which attracted a lot of VCs from funds who were interested in investing in deep tech companies. And I think that ecosystem, made it super easy for us to raise money. Also, our executive chairman was a seasoned founder and entrepreneur, was ex-CTO of Yahoo as well. I think he had very deep relationships. So I think that made it even further easy for us to raise money. So I think both of those factors helped us on our journey to raise the capital we needed with the right investors. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting. So so we have another question here by the audience. So based on your experience, companies building databases to monetizing it, looking back, what advice would you give interns of building blocks? In terms of building blocks, what should entrepreneurs keep in mind?
So I guess like the question is like if you're building a company to like a data warehouse, a database company to kind of monetize, collect data and monetize it, is that what the question is?
Yeah. So what? Yeah. So I guess if somebody's starting off in this space where they're building a company, looking at similar problems, what should those entrepreneurs keep in mind?
Yeah. So again, I think like there's so many different problems in this space, right? Like one problem I think, which is if you are looking to solve that, a lot of companies don't really even know how to monetize their data, how to even package insights in them. Building kind of applications around that, like what data actually even has value in a database. Sometimes that's unclear to organizations, and I would say like to a lot of organizations. It's a worthwhile problem to explore and see like how do you figure out which data is valuable, and to know that, then you need to be able to know like which models this data will feed into, and then accordingly what the use case those models are trying to solve. Those kind of key things is very interesting. It's a very massive problem to solve, but that's very interesting. So again, I think like the core thing comes down to the fact that if you are trying to build something where you're like, hey, I want to monetize data for someone, but if you're not a data company yourself, then you have to go collect data, and that's a very challenging problem by itself. So the key thing is that your company or organization should have a data mode from day one if your goal is eventually to add data monetization as a layer to your organization.
So let me ask this, right? So if you're building a data monetization company, it's a very general thing, right? Do you need to see, so did you see that you had to pivot at like, this is the particular sector which I'm targeting for my—
Yeah. So we were not building a data monetization company, right? We're building a data privacy company, right? So like the way to think about that is, right, like, so you're either building applications or building like tools to enable those applications. We thought about ourselves as the tools, right? So like anyone who wants to use sensitive data requires data privacy capabilities. Doesn't really matter which sector you're in. If that's sensitive data, you require that. That's a tool. So it's an infrastructure play. And then, you need, if you want to do machine learning in a federated fashion, again, it's an infrastructure, but it could be any type of data. So we kind of build like we picked the infrastructure problem. Was like, hey, if generally we believe that organizations want to extract value from their data set, but they want to do it in a secure and private manner, how would you do that? This is the way to go about doing that, right? So I personally think like infrastructure companies, have a easier kind of like problem to solve in a broader market. If you're building an application, I think you obviously need the infrastructure to exist to build that application problem. And I think now the cloud ecosystem has enabled that, a lot of that infrastructure. So now you can go build a lot of applications, specific niches for these type of things.
Nice. So you didn't actually, so you don't actually have to pivot, say, in the the pharma market, right? So you didn't actually pivot, you just went like a general platform, and that
yeah,
was
we were like approaching it as a platform problem, right? Like, hey, like, you can be in the healthcare industry, you can be in financial services, you can be in, logistics, you can be in transportation. You have like, all of these things. And how do you think about anonymizing data, which is an important problem? How do you think about, extracting value from the data? And those companies are experts in these type of things, right? Like, you can, like, if someone is, let's say, in the location or like transportation space, they know what the value of their data is typically, or like what the use cases are. Like, it's very hard to become an expert in that. But what you can help them with is like, how do you do it in a secure and private manner? And that's the key thing, which we were trying to solve at our startup, which, yeah.
Okay, nice. So, so we have another question on raising funds. At what stage should one go to VC to raise funds? Do you need to achieve a certain endpoint before your startup can go make that jump?
I think like the VC market is definitely blown up in the last like 6 to 8 months even, right? Like, so the bar for like when you can raise from VC is very different what it used to be even a year ago, and then incredibly different what it was like 2, 3, 4 years ago. Rapid shifts, which is awesome. I think most of the best time to be a founder, in at least in my experience, because you can raise money very easily. I think the key thing is that, if you think like you have an idea, you're a great team, you have proven some things, right? Like, at least you went and talked to customers, few dozen of them, this is a problem you want to solve. And now if you're building a deep tech company, obviously it's hard, you need capital, right? Because it's a hardware company or a significantly research intensive company, to even do your first MVP, it's capital intensive. Then maybe that's a great time to go raise money, right? You've talked to a few customers, like the problem, you have a solid team. And if you have like, the folks on your team who have PhDs and like specialists in that research area, I'm sure a lot of investors would love to support you guys. If you're building something, which doesn't require a lot of money to like, ship the first product, could be done like in 5, 10K or 15K, you might as well just try doing that and getting it in the hands of customers and getting some data. It's a very different, playbook around raising that. So I think it really depends, like, when you feel comfortable that you've validated the market enough, you have strong enough conviction that you want to double down and you want to go aggressively pursue this as full-time founders, and you're already now full-time on it, you should go raise the money. I think that to me is a great kind of like inflection point from like, hey, we want to do this from the side of the desk, to like actually go build a company now.
Okay, nice advice for people like us who are thinking about these issues. So there is another interesting question. So until now, we've been talking about Snowflake and CryptoNumerics. So somebody's asking about the investing you're doing as well. What do you look for in companies, and what is the most common advice you give to startup founders?
Like I've invested like now in like, around 10 plus deals over the last like 2, 3 years in very different stages from pre-seed to Series C. I think like what I'm excited, like, pre-seed and seed is super exciting for me. And the key thing again is that, like I need to be excited by the founder. So like, this founder story and the velocity of change for that founder story, right? Like if you grew up where do you grow up? What was your journey within your school? How do you go from your school to where you are today, right? Like how fast someone has exponentially grown as an individual. I think that's very important for me to understand, because I think that indicates to me how they will take that persistence, learning to like their company, or from a velocity of growth. It doesn't really matter like, where you are today. It really matters to me like that journey space. So I really try to understand the founder's journey and their velocity of growth. Then I think the second thing I look for is like, the market opportunity. Do I understand the market? Can I kind of add some value to the founder? If the market is something I'm excited about, then, I want to double down there. If the market is not really super exciting, but like I was super compelled by the founder and they have, I will write them a small check, or like, via some other ways support them. I will invest like if I obviously understand the market and get really excited by the founder. So those are kind of like 2 key things. And then the third thing, which I really like look for at the earliest stage, is that, do you have a compelling vision? If your vision is super compelling, that's an indication of a founder who can sell, tell a story. And if you can sell and tell a story as a founder, you can recruit, you can get additional investors, you can get additional customers. So that's very critical for me, like how they tell their vision and how compelling it is. And then how do they kind of convert that compelling vision into a frame or plan of action to execute against that? Some founders like are really high up, really good, but then they have no way of like executing against that. So that's a very important like thing which I look for as well. So those are kind of like 3 areas I think I want to double down. And as long as that checks out, I'll write them a pre-seed or seed check.
Okay, interesting. So it seems like you, from what I heard, you're actually investing in the individual more.
Yeah,
right?
I think at the earliest stage you're investing in the individual, right? Like the companies pivot from the early stages, but if the founders are super focused, have like the persistence, can survive, they have that velocity growth, they will figure out a way to make it work. And sometimes obviously it doesn't really work out, and that's totally fine as well. But earliest stage investing, I think, is more of the individual than the company. So I lean definitely heavily on the individual piece and the market opportunity piece.
Okay, interesting. So, and also what I've heard is everybody has ideas, but the person who actually wins is who takes that idea and implements it. So do you look at their history if they've implemented certain things when they come to you, or when with a new idea?
No. So I think like, so like that velocity kind of growth for me is that, like looking at like key indicators, right? Like their execution ability, their ability to building relationships, building networks, and all of those things are like, a very key piece for, I think, for someone to grow massively in the life, whatever they were doing. They have to have credibility, they have to have execution ability, they have to have ability to sell. So I think it's a great indicator that they have done those things. And you can obviously I double click on those things to understand that. Because yeah, if you can't execute, if you never executed before, and there's no one on your team who has executed, then I think it's going to be hard to build a company. And there are a lot of first-time founders. Like I was a first-time founder, but are there like signals which indicate to you like, hey, they can execute? And you can take proxies for those things as well. And you want to create that. Make sure that the investor, like myself or some other investors, understand that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if you're allowed to say, can you give any examples of certain people you've invested in, or are you not allowed to say it yet?
Also, like one kind of company, which is which I'm very passionate about. I help actually incubate them and grow them. The key thing for the founder there was like he went through med school, and while going through med school, obviously that in North America is super hard by itself. Within med school, he did research in deep learning and machine learning with like some of the leading professors and published papers. So that to me is a great signal of this person's ability to manage insane amount of work and kind of execute against them at the highest quality. And then while doing these things, he came up with this idea of like, building a company. And he actually went and talked to like 200 people to validate that idea. Like those three signals by themselves are such strong indicators of this person, like not giving up, being persistent, figuring things out, new things out as well. Because obviously like, went from undergrad to med school, but figured out how to do deep learning, machine learning research, just self-taught themselves how to do programming. Huge. Then wanted to build a company, went and talked to like 200 people in the space. Huge. So can sell and can build those relationships. So those are kind of like strong indicators that that person is gonna do well if they build a company. And I took that as a signal, and then started working with them.
Okay, nice, interesting. So we have 5 minutes left. And 10% on my laptop's battery. So what advice would you give a person who's coming out of university right now? Or maybe yourself when you were coming out of university right now, some lessons which you used to worry about at that time, and what would you go back and tell 18-year-old Hassan at that time, for example?
Yeah, no, I think like the best things which have worked for me, like throughout my career, I think is like picking people or salaries or compensation packages. So I think always pick the team and the people. When I came back from San Francisco, I had an offer to join a company almost at a 2x salary as a PM. I picked this other organization, which led me to meet the founding team at CryptoNumerics. If I had done that, I most likely would have never met them. So, and I think it's like, so I always prefer the people and the culture is not right. I don't really care about the compensation structure. So I think that has been my goal since I was like in college, and this has paid amazing dividends. So I think that would be one advice from my perspective. I think the second thing is like, take risks. A lot of people underestimate the rewards and super overestimate the risks. And you need to like really rethink that framework, in my perspective. And most things don't have a lot of risk. While the risk is like you think is 10x, it's most probably 2x if you really think about it, and the reward is like 100x. So I think really being in your earlier kind of career doing that, I think that's a very important thing in my opinion. I think the third thing is that like school is a very straight single linear game, and life is a multiplayer game where there are like a lot of variables which are being hit at you. So being able to kind of know which variables are important to you and then accordingly prioritizing for those, because you can't prioritize for everything. Like that's just impossible because there's so many variables which you can work on. So really knowing what you care about and then accordingly prioritizing for those. And then making sure you go at least 2 to 3 years in that direction. So like spending the focus and the effort and the energy behind them to get some results, right? Like a lot of people give up because they don't get the results in the first few months. Sometimes things just take a few years. So being persistent about those and, just being on that path, I think those are 3 things which I think I learned luckily early on from mentors and coaches, which I think have been amazing principles for me throughout life so far.
Interesting. So, so we're just about to wrap up. Hassan, how do we get in touch with you if somebody's interested in working with you? Or
yeah, like I'm super active on Twitter. You can just DM me on Twitter. I can drop. I don't know if I can drop it in the chat or something, but my handle is HW and my last name BHATTI. So HW Bhatti. And super active on Twitter, like so if you have any idea you want to share, just DM me, and I try to respond mostly pretty fast. I'm always happy to connect with people, and because I think like connecting with people you learn a lot as well. So always looking forward to like connecting with some other awesome individuals.
Okay, thank you so much, Hassan. I know I've asked you so many questions and I took so much of your time. Thank you for answering all of them very diligently. So we've just got about 2 minutes left. And just in the end, I wanted to say that thank you to OpenSV for giving us this chance to hear from Hassan and his experiences so that we can learn and hopefully implement it in our own lives. If people are interested in connecting to OpenSV, there are Facebook and LinkedIn links. But this particular recording will also be available on YouTube afterwards. So it is being streamed live on Facebook, but it's also going to be available on YouTube. And there are other more interesting interviews or talks as well. So I was asked to tell everyone that please feel free to subscribe there. And yeah, everybody please reach out to Hassan. I'm going to add you as well, Hassan, so to keep in touch and learn from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, you guys, for having me. Hopefully it was helpful. And yeah, if there's any other questions I can address, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.